That is a illness that runs in families. And so people will come in and say, oh yeah, like my grandparents have this, I heard that some great uncle twice removed, whatever, they had it too, but no one was willing to ask for help, or no one was willing to say that they were experiencing this. And so when I said I had it, they were like, oh, but like that's normal, so don't worry about it, that's normal. And so it takes a lot of courage on the part, I think, of our younger generations to stand up and say, hey, I am experiencing this and it feels weird and I don't like it. And so I would just, as a brief aside, encourage all of you that if you have a young person who mentions anything of the sort of feeling uncomfortable, feeling down, feeling just not okay in their experience, to please not take that lightly, because it takes a lot, especially for a young Black person, it takes a lot to even open up your mouth and say that, because you have not been in those stories in the past. Another problem in lack of awareness would be the lack of information. Because we have different barriers when it comes to the diagnostic tools for mental health and mental illness, because we have not shown up in things like, as simple as, like I said, posters, infomercials, things of that sort, people are unaware of what resources are around them. And so you might have individuals who are at a place where they're like, yes, I am ready to get help. I know that what I'm experiencing is not okay. But then it stops there because they don't know what they're supposed to do or where they're supposed to go. And so that is, one of the things where we would love to say for every individual, prevention is better than cure. So the second you start noticing something is off, go get help. And people are willing to do that, but they don't know where to go get the help from. They might go to school and see a counterpart who, a child of a different culture, a different race, and that child is getting the help that they need, but they're like, I don't know how they did that. And that is a very unfortunate challenge that we're facing. Okay. Our next barrier to Black mental health would be myths and misunderstandings. And this is a really huge one. And so I guess I would say there's different schools of thought that are often perpetuated in the Black community. And these schools of thought often dampen opportunities and the resolve that people might have to go get the help that they need for themselves. So I have a couple examples here. One being, if you don't have a severe mental illness, you don't need help. That is something that I think I hear a lot of other therapists I work with hear a lot. If it's not severe, you're good. Don't take it any further, don't talk about it, you're fine. Next thing, our mental health problems will get better on their own. Now, this is sometimes true, and I want to preface and say that. This is sometimes true. We all, having mental health, can wake up one morning and just have a low day. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Let's go forward a while. You can wake up and just feel like, I'm on the wrong side of the bed this morning. Have any of you ever felt like that before? You woke up, you were drained, you had low energy, somebody said something and it rubbed you the wrong way, and suddenly you're crying in your car and you don't know what's going on. Those are all examples of a bad mental health day. And oftentimes, a good night's sleep, some food, a favorite snack like that, kind of perks you up a little, talking to somebody that you love. But when these things start to pile up, and you're having more and more days where you're crying in your car, or more and more days where you're really angry and you can't explain why, or your partner is asking you, hey, what's wrong, and you don't know how to answer them, or you're a child and you're, coming home from school just feeling super overwhelmed and everything the teacher said made you like, those are examples of bad mental health that I would say don't wait for them to fix themselves. It is always better to be extra cautious when it comes to your mental health. So if you've noticed that you have a couple of bad days, it's okay to, find a counselor, talk to a friend, talk to somebody that you trust at church, talk to a family member. Those are things that we want to do because prevention is better than cure. Another misunderstanding that we have in the Black community is that your poor mental health is part of the struggle and is therefore a rite of passage. And I would say this is the most detrimental one because it's perpetuated not only in the Black community, but in all the communities surrounding us. Everyone likes to pin it on Black people to have a struggle. Now, It has become to the point where we feel like it's a rite of passage, or that's how you're going to be defined as a strong Black woman, or whatever it is. We feel as though if we did not struggle, we're not aligned with the Black experience. And that is so far from the truth. Nowhere does it say in any official book that we need to struggle. It doesn't. We have struggled, and we are strong, and we are powerful, and all of those magnificent things that God has created us to be, but we don't have to do it. And we particularly do not have to struggle alone. And I think that is one of the most important things as well. If you are struggling, that is okay. It is not something to be ashamed of, but you shouldn't have to be, and you should not have to be doing so on your own. Our next barrier is stigma. And stigma would be defined as a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. Now, stigma can be self-imposed as well as put upon you by other people. And stigma is a huge barrier in the Black mental health community, and I'm going to give you a personal example to share what I mean. So when preparing for this workshop, I thought a lot about, well, how can I start this off in a way that's like interesting and fun, because yay, I want people to love it, you know? And I was like, okay, maybe to combat stigma, I start off and I say, hi, my name is Shaina, and I have anxiety, because I do. I actually have extremely bad anxiety. And I was like, yeah, that'll be great. I'll start off with that. Immediately, boom, you normalize it. Boom, you reduce stigma. I'm out here just being willing to say it, and hopefully other people will follow suit. And then I thought about it, and I was like, ooh, just to out there say it, I have anxiety. That felt like a lot. So maybe I say, I worry a lot. Hi, my name is Shaina, and I get really worried from time to time. And then I was like, yeah, that might be more gentle. People might receive it better. It'll be great. I'm going to call out my mom and my auntie because I then was in the car with them one day, and they were asking me, how's it going, prepping for your workshop? And I was like, good, I had this great idea where I'm going to start off by saying what mental health challenge I'm going through. And they both kind of like whipped their heads around. They were like, you're going to do what? And now, I want to preface, they are two of the most understanding people I know. They get mental health. They work with individuals who face mental health challenges. I wouldn't really call them individuals who put stigma on other people. They are so loving and kind, right? But I think as Black people, we all have this idea where people already don't look at us well, you know. So why would we suddenly give them something more to look down on us upon? Why would we give them more ammunition? And so, yeah, my mom and my auntie were like, Shaina, maybe you rethink that one. You don't have to hop in with that right off the bat. What if it's not the best look? And I panicked. And as you saw, I did not start with that today. But I'm saying it now. Okay. So who knows how well that happened. But that is an example of what stigma is and what it does. Stigma is what prevents you from speaking your truth because you're worried about how other people might perceive it. Stigma is an example of what you do when you're hiding parts of yourself because people already don't like you very much. So why would I make it harder? Why would I try to make it harder to exist in a society who does not like me? And that is how come a lot of Black people do not get the help that they need. They are already scared of who they are. Not because there's something to be feared, not because they did something wrong, but because they've been told who you are already is not enough. And I mean, that's heartbreaking. To not be able to show up as your full self, flaws and all, because you're already worried about what people think or how they might perceive you. Now, I said stigma can be self-imposed, and a lot of the time I do think that people would be slightly more open than we expect them to. Slightly, at least, because we are still Black, and I'm not going to act like we're not. But I think that we hype it up in our heads a little bit too, and that's because we've been burned before, or our parents have been burned, or our cousins, or our aunties and uncles. We see it all the time, and it becomes a mode of self-preservation. Do you want to be hurt willingly? Absolutely not. As humans, we do not want to be hurt. We do not want to feel discomfort. We do not want to feel fear. None of that. And so we don't say when we're going through a hard time. We don't say when we're struggling. We don't even say when it starts to get slightly less hard, or slightly more hard, than things have been on the day-to-day basis. All right, let me see. I would like to kind of talk about something within stigma, kind of a subheading of stigma, I guess, and that would be the word shame. And shame is something that unfortunately is very much so part of the Black experience. So this definition of shame is my favorite definition. It is by Brené Brown. Some of you might know her. She has a lot of really fantastic books. She's a social worker as well, so obviously I love her. And she says, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love, belonging, and connection. So, I mean, if you take a second and conceptualize your Black experience, have you ever felt unworthy of love? Have you ever felt like you don't belong? Have you ever felt like you cannot connect with somebody? I'm sure many of you have. I know I have. So imagine that just being your experience to begin with. That's your experience because of the color of your skin. And then on top of it, now you have a mental health thing going on, and you're supposed to show up and talk about it openly. That's really, really uncomfortable and scary. And so society definitely positions Black individuals in such a way where our very existence is shame-inducing, and so we do avoid anything that could potentially devalue us further. So if we consider stigma surrounding mental health in general, much less for Black individuals, there's a double challenge here. Other communities, other races, they also face stigma when it comes to mental health. And so it's kind of like we got a double portion of something that we didn't quite want, but here we are. All right. So some examples of stigma in the Black community. Our first one saying, I don't want other people to know about my personal business. Okay, that is one that comes up a ton. I've actually noticed when I look at my clients that I see, and I will say I don't have a lot of Black clients or even clients of color. Again, probably because of other barriers we've already talked about. But for the ones I have, I do notice that it's a lot harder to build a sense of rapport with them. And what I mean by that is that they get very comfortable with me right away as though I'm their buddy. And they're like, hey sis, how's it going? And like, I want to tell you about everything. Except they don't actually want to tell me about everything. And I know that because we'll start to get into a deep topic and they just veer left. They just change it up on me real quick. And I'm continually like, whoa, where were you going with that? There's more. And they continue to say, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't think I can tell you that. Oh, that's kind of private. And then I'm continuously bringing up our confidentiality agreement, where legally, I can't say anything, even if I really, really wanted to. So you can tell me something. I'm not going to spill your secrets. I'm not going to keep it, I'm not going to put it on blast somewhere. But it's so much harder for my clients of color to say something. And that is because we have this idea where your personal business is your personal business, and we have that idea because we don't want people to look down on us. We're used to people looking down on us. We're used to being shamed as a community, and so that carries over into everything that we do. We also fear judgment a lot, which is something that I will say. And so I even think that sometimes being a Black individual, seeing a Black therapist, there is that sense of, ooh, I don't want them to think I'm like a Black person who's not giving all elements of Black excellence. Like I'm not out here like, woo. And it's not like that. We obviously cannot all show up all the time. We cannot be perfect ever. But a lot of people fail to recognize that, and they put a lot of pressure on themselves under the guise of Black excellence. Next thing, people will say, having mental health challenges is basically being crazy. That's a big one. It is. And I would say that, because mental health has been viewed as a taboo topic, period, even though we have come a long way, and I would say, in 2023, we're doing pretty okay-ish on our conversations about mental health in general, it's still super taboo, and particularly for Black people. and that's because we're shaming ourselves for it, and we don't want to talk about it. Now, I've mentioned that I treat obsessive compulsive disorder, and one of the concepts to treating that, because OCD is based in fear, is that in order to break free of fear, you have to address it head on. That's okay. And so I will tell somebody, if you're scared of something, I'm going to make you say it to me. And once they say it, and they say it again, and they say it a few times, I'll say, okay, what's going on? What's happening? And they'll be like, oh, it's not as bad as it was before. It's getting easier to say. It's still uncomfortable, but I can say it. That is something that we're missing in our community. We don't get to the point where we say it. We don't want to share our experiences. We don't want to say something that's going to make us seem crazy. And because we're scared to do it, the fear just gets bigger and bigger in our minds. You're scared to talk to your friends. You're scared to talk to your family because you just think they're going to think I'm crazy. And then it builds to they're going to think I'm a lunatic. And then it's they're going to want to disown me. We really do, as humans, tend to build our own problems simply because we're trying to avoid something. And so this is an example of self-imposed stigma, particularly. Last one I have here is somebody might say, I'm alone in this experience, so how would I even reach out for help without being judged? Thank you. How would I reach out for help without being judged? Now, stigma prevents people from sharing their experiences, which perpetuates the idea that you're the only one going through something. If we were to all just open up and say, yeah, have you ever experienced blah, blah, blah before? I can guarantee you at least 3 or 4 other people in this room would say, yeah, I've experienced that too. Maybe not exactly the way you did, but some degree of it. But because we're failing to open up and say it, we continue to all hoard our own little secrets and think we're the only one. And what that means is we're not normalizing when you're going through something. We're not normalizing the experience of having poor mental health. We're not normalizing the experience of having an actual diagnosable mental illness. And if you're already struggling, why would you want to be judged? And so that's why people are remaining silent. Okay. Oh, that did not. Oh, yes, it did. Okay. Okay. Faith is a actually massive barrier to mental health. And it kind of makes me uncomfortable to say that. I'm not going to lie. So don't throw stones at me, but it's true. Faith can be a huge barrier to our mental health. Now, I had the pleasure of being here with all of you, I think it was 2 weeks ago for the concert. It was a fantastic concert. I enjoyed myself immensely, yes. And something that actually came up a couple times that I clocked was people mentioning how close faith is tied to the Black experience. It's like we're bred for it. Like, we just love God so much, and I am so happy to be a part of that because he is everything. And I think it makes sense because as a people who have been through so much struggle and have literally, like, we're examples of the Psalms, draw me out of the pit. We have been in the pit. We have been in despair. We have felt as though there's no way out. We have been oppressed. There are so many things in different degrees. It makes sense why we seek God so much. It makes sense why we want to call on him. But worshiping God, while it's a part of who we are, and it's tied to our culture, it can often bring up some things that are not so good. And I'm going to give some examples. Common misconceptions within the church are that people will feel as though they're going to get judged by their religious community for having mental illness or having a mental health challenge. Now, they feel as though they're going to be judged because it just seems imperfect. You're not perfect because you're struggling in this area, and you shouldn't be. And I think we can all fall into the trap from time to time where you feel as though you have to be perfect to come before God, or you have to be perfect to serve. It's definitely not true, but it is something that a lot of us fall into. It's this whole, like, I have to show up and prove to God that he can use me. And so that can tend to get skewed in a way where people are now scared to say to somebody in their church, yeah, my mental health is failing right now, because then, yeah, you're not perfect. You're not all shiny and pretty. anymore. Next thing is a misconception that seeking mental health support undermines your faith. And I have heard this both just as an individual in a church, and I've heard this as a therapist, where it seems like I shouldn't be going through this to begin with, but since I am, I should just pray it away. And when I've prayed and I've prayed and I've prayed and it hasn't worked yet, maybe I just don't have enough faith. Maybe it's a me thing. Maybe I'm the problem, the end. And I would say that that's just simply untrue. I think that when we look at faith, yes, faith can make incredible things happen. The Bible tells us that faith can move mountains, but can we look at faith in a different way? Can faith be stepping out and getting help from somebody not knowing how it's going to go? Can faith be trusting that God has given another person incredible talent and gifts to help you? Can faith be, you know what, God, maybe you're calling me to seek help from somebody so they can be used by you too. There's so many different ways that faith can come into getting help, but we tend to stop at like, my faith isn't good enough because I feel like I need something other than prayer. Next one that kind of follows closely with that is that people believe that having a mental illness demonstrates a form of unrighteousness. And we see this in varying degrees, from people telling you your mental health is a demon, to people simply saying, oh, like, it's probably because of something that you did. So we have a lot of people carrying a lot of, weight on their back because they're concerned that I did this to myself, or I'm being punished for something that I did way back when. And, by God's grace, he's not a God like that. He doesn't put things on us as punishment like that. Otherwise, he would not have sent his son to die for our sins. Like, he would have just continued to punish us each individually for the things that we did. He's not a God like that. And so we are so blessed to serve a God who loves us exactly as we are, who wants us exactly as we are, and who has already saved us, even though we don't deserve it. And I think that we can forget that very easily. So unrighteousness is certainly not a reason for mental health challenges, by God's grace, because he's not a God like that. And that's really that. Our final one under faith that I'm going to touch on is that mental health is not biblical. And there's this false belief that mental health or illness does not show up in the Bible at all, so we shouldn't validate it. And I'm going to just give you a couple examples of faith in the Bible, mental health in the Bible. Although, yes, there's faith too. Okay, the Psalms. The Psalms are full of examples of people with like really bad mental health. And I specifically pulled on Psalms 88 because if you read through that, it is rough. Like whoever wrote Psalms 88, I'm not sure if it's David. I'm not 100% sure. They were going through it. Some words I pulled: crying out, despaired, I'm in the pit, feeling of darkness and heaviness. And that right there is pretty much a diagnosis for depression and anxiety. So I think it's unfair just through reading the Psalms alone to say that there's no examples of mental health in the Bible. But we have more. Elijah. And Elijah is probably one of my favorite Bible characters for viewing the human experience, because we saw Elijah go through it all. He was like, oh my goodness, I'm seeing God do these incredible things. It's fantastic. Like, I'm commanding no rain and there's no rain. Like, he saw God do the most. And yet we see him in a few chapters, like crying out, like, I want to die. I don't want to be here. Like, he was scared. He was fearful. He was hopeless. He was tired. He experienced a ton of human emotions, right? And I mean, not that this is about Elijah, but God did bring him out of that too. But he is a perfect example of someone who had poor mental health. He had some really rough days. Next one that I'll bring up briefly is the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus spends time reminding us on the Sermon on the Mount not to be anxious about our lives, not to worry. And those are two really big things when we talk about mental health. And we see something very similar in Philippians. The Church of Philippi is reminded, don't be anxious about anything. And you don't remind someone not to be anxious unless they're already anxious. That's not just something you pull out of nowhere. And so we have these very definite examples in the Bible where people did have poor mental health. That is aside from, we actually have diagnosable illnesses that we could probably talk about in the Bible too, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But this is just your friendly reminder that if you are experiencing a mental health challenge, do not think that it's something that is not biblical or something that you shouldn't experience because the Bible doesn't talk about it. The Bible talks about it. It really does. Okay. There's an African proverb that says, when spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. And that's, again, from Dr. Rita Walker's book that I mentioned earlier. The reason I bring this up, The reason I bring this up is kind of a call for us to stick together. If mental health is the lion, we are all spider webs. And we can tackle this in our community if we're all doing so together, if we're all united. By the same token, if you are experiencing something or you see someone else, don't think that you cannot be the one to help them. You can. You can totally be the one to give someone a hand. You just have to be looking for it and willing to be vulnerable and say to that person, hey, I see you. I'm not sure how you're doing, but I'm here to talk about it. I don't have to give you advice. I don't have to direct you to someone. I'm just here to listen. And do so privately between us if that's what you want. So we can all consider ourselves as spider webs, and I think that would be something that would be very healthy for us to do. All right. We're coming close to the end here. I want to, okay, well, this is not working anymore. I apologize. Oh, yes, it is. I want us to quickly touch on some ways that we can address barriers to Black mental health in the church. The first one, and these are in no particular order, by the way. The first one is to normalize mental health concepts and conversations. The more we bring up mental health, the more people are comfortable with sharing their own experiences, the more comfortable they are with reaching out for help. And this is especially important as a community who has been suppressed and led to not be comfortable with these discussions in the past. I would say, Malton, you have done a great job of this today by even making space for a conversation on mental health in your celebration of Black history. And so I would just say thank you for that. It's a wonderful thing to do. Another way that we can normalize mental health concepts is talking about it in sermons, bringing it up in Sabbath school, talking about it in your small groups and clubs and programs that you have. These are all ways that we can cultivate a safe space where somebody who is having mental health challenges feels as though it's okay for them to say something about it. Next one is to highlight confidentiality in your conversations. So stigma is so real, as we talked about. We all get trapped into it, unfortunately. And many Black individuals do feel that shame when discussing their experiences that have suppressed them in the past. So if you are talking to someone and you just remind them, hey, just so you know, anything you talk to me about, it's going to stay between us unless you tell me otherwise. It immediately unlocks this ability for that person to say, okay, I can tell them and it's not going to run around the church. I could tell them and sister so-and-so and brother so-and-so aren't going to confront me about it later. That might not have happened anyway, but that person is going to need that reminder because they've been in a position to feel unsafe with sharing their experiences in the past. Next one I have is prioritize validating emotions. So with both kids and adults, if we see someone going through something or doing something, I think we all tend to think that we can fix it in a way, and so we go in with advice, or we go in with correction. Have you tried this? Did you do that? What that ends up doing is making the individual receiving that feel as though it's on them. They didn't do enough, they didn't know the right strategies, it's their fault. If we go in with validation first, that individual is able to first feel safe and seen, and then actually hear you in what you're saying. So an example of validating is if somebody comes to me and says, hey, Shaina, I've been feeling really blah, blah, blah lately. Let's say anxious. Instead of me saying, have you tried deep breathing and have you tried peppermint oil? I could say, hey, like that's really hard to feel anxious. That is difficult. I'm sorry that you're going through that. And that's the formula for validation right there. Saying, I'm sorry you're going through that. And then, how can I help? Because sometimes people already know what they're going to do. Maybe they already have the peppermint oil in their purse, you know? So we don't have to tell them, did you do this and that? Or we don't have to tell them, did you already go to a counselor? They know that they should do that. But just having that person there to listen and say, oh, like they heard me. They're not chastising me. It's okay that I feel this way. I can get through it. That does a world of wonders. Our next thing is to promote self-care. Now, we didn't touch much on self-care. I will briefly say that self-care is a great way to maintain your mental health. And so even if you're not experiencing poor mental health, if you want that ability to, be psychologically well, emotionally well, socially well, those examples that we talked about, self-care is a great way to just maintain that. Doing things that fill up your cup so that you can then pour into other people's cup. And so when we promote self-care, what that looks like is doing it yourself because other people are watching. And so they can see, hey, this person does such and such. I should try that. Or, wow, this person, when they're overwhelmed, they say no. I can say no sometimes. That's okay. I think a lot of us in the church are scared to say no. We get really burdened and heavy laden with things because we are so fearful of saying no sometimes. And I'm not saying this so that, next time you all get nominated, everyone's like, no, please don't. But I do think that it is okay to sometimes say, you know what, I don't have the bandwidth for that right now, but I know someone else who would be fantastic at it. That is a great way of demonstrating self-care, just as an aside. We did speak about how the struggle for Black people is kind of a rite of passage. It's how you know you're Black. It's your Black card, all that stuff. But promoting self-care, taking breaks, saying no, and resting are all things that remind us that we can break that cycle of the struggle. It is a way for us to slow down and just be, and to chill, right? And to just take in what's happening, process the things that we're going through, and figure out how we can be of better service to ourselves, our loved ones, to God, all these things. There's a reason that God gave us the Sabbath, and it is self-care. God asks us to rest. And so in doing that and in modeling that, our younger generations, our kids, all those things, they are seeing you do that, and it helps them break free of the struggle. It really does. Next thing I have is watch your lingo. A couple words that I would say to be careful of. Words like psycho, lunatic, mental, things like that, crazy. Those are words that, nuts, thank you, yeah. All kinds, you see how many we can come up with, right? What we fail to realize is that for somebody who is going through a mental health challenge or a mental illness, something that has been diagnosed or could be diagnosed, they're immediately like, ooh, I think that's me. And the way they said that, they won't like me very much. So let me just bow out. Let me not ask for help. I'm not welcome here. I'm not safe here. And I don't know if you're hearing it, but to me, that already sounds a lot like the Black experience. I'm not welcome here. I'm not safe here. Let me head out. So that just becomes, this one perpetuation over another, and it makes people feel really unsafe. So watching your lingo, using the appropriate terminology for a mental illness. If somebody says, I have borderline personality disorder, don't be like, oh, that's the person with split personalities. Don't do that, We have to always be very cautious of our lingo. How are we speaking about that person or that experience? And doing so allows people to just feel safe with you. And I think it's really important for people to feel safe, especially amongst church family. That's what we're here for, right? To love and to support. Next thing I have is show up for others inside and outside of the church. So we spoke about a lack of awareness with mental health due to Black bodies, stories, and experiences not being highlighted in our typical, everyday learning on mental health. Showing up at events that focus on mental health, first of all, as Black people, and secondly, as a church, or you know what, I should reverse that. Firstly, as a church, and secondly, as Black people, showing up for those things says, hey, we're here, we understand, and we want to help. It's a great way to connect with people that you would not have met before. It's a great way to normalize the experience that's being had, and it's a great way to increase awareness. So showing up is an amazing thing. The next thing we have is don't blame or shame. So when we spoke about those faith barriers, we mentioned that we can inadvertently make people feel that they are to be blamed or shamed for their experience, as though they didn't have enough faith, they were too sinful, or whatever the case may be. This is something that only serves to perpetuate harmful experiences that we endure being Black, period. So when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm going through something, don't immediately bring it to like, well, did you, or have you, or you should. Those are all words that incur a lot of shame. Should is probably the biggest one. If you hear yourself shoulding all the time, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, that is your number one indicator to take a step back and really think, because that means you're just putting a bunch of baggage on somebody that doesn't need to be there, or on yourself. And I should really highlight that. We all have self-talk. It sounds silly, but we do all talk to ourselves in our brain, unless I'm outing myself right now, but I'm pretty sure we all do it. If you notice that you're saying a lot of should to yourself, that is a big indicator that you should probably seek someone, and I just said it should, but this time it works. You should probably seek help, or just take a second and be more gentle with yourself. Our last one that I have here is to pray. I think that is our most powerful way to address these barriers to Black mental health, and just address your own mental health, the mental health of your family, your friends, your loved ones, is to pray. Now, that quote that I had way at the beginning of this talk, it mentioned basically that the same things that are harmful to the Black community for our mental health are also the things that are really helpful. And we've already established that something super helpful for the Black community is faith. And so let's use it to our advantage. God is there. God is hearing us. It's not to say that just because you prayed, everything goes away, and if it didn't, that's a problem on you and you didn't pray well enough. But it's to say that prayer changes things, and we should always implement it in whatever we're doing. And so if somebody comes to you with a mental health challenge, you can validate, hey, I'm sorry that you're going through that. That must be really difficult. Can I pray with you? And when you're praying, just asking for strength, asking God for peace for them, asking God to show you how you can be a support. I mean, that sounds really great, right? I think anyone would really appreciate that. So prayer is incredible. I'm going to kind of start wrapping up here with this scripture verse. And it's Psalms chapter 34, verse 18. And it says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." The most important thing we can do when addressing Black mental health and the barriers for the Black community in our churches is to do what Jesus would do. Be close to them. Sit with them. Dwell with somebody while they're feeling brokenhearted. It's okay to not do anything or to not fix it right away. Just be with them. That's what Jesus did. He went to where all the people were who were struggling, the people that he should not have been around, and he just hung out with them and loved on them. And that's exactly what we can do. So, I'm going to give us an opportunity if anyone does have a question, a comment, an idea, and would like to share it, we can go ahead. If not, that's also okay, but I will give that time. I think we're good, though. if there's no questions, I hope that means it's because I didn't confuse you and I did what I was supposed to do. Oh, but yes.
My question is, if you have a young child that going through a mental situation, what is the symptoms that we'll look for? Or what is the first symptoms will tell us that she's going through something or he going through something?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think one of the main things to look for is them being exceptionally clingy or very distant. Now, clingy would be because children regulate their emotions through their parents. They're not at a stage where they can go through those emotional cycles on their own, so they look to you for their reaction. I don't know if you've ever noticed a child fall and almost look to you before they burst into tears. That's that example. So if they're super clingy to you, it's because they're feeling a lot and they don't know what to do with it. By the same token, if they're really far from you and they're just distant, it could mean that they're being very apathetic to the things going on around them, and they don't have it in them to process what's happening, so they just shut down. Other things to look for if your child is a bit older is saying, I'm worried, my tummy hurts, I'm scared, wanting to sleep in your bed a lot, not wanting to go to school, being worried that their friends don't like them, things like that are kind of examples. Or them just like really complaining all the time about not wanting to go to school, and you know that they've gotten sleep, but they keep complaining that they're tired, things like that. Thank you.
Hi, Shaina. Just really good content. Hey, I wanted to ask, and you going back to faith, right?
Yes.
And what do you say to somebody when you heard that you're hearing this conversation? They're saying, you know, you're not praying enough, you don't have enough, your faith isn't strong enough. You're like the third person listening, and like how sometimes I want to just intervene, but say the right thing, and I don't because I'm like, what do you say? What's a good way to address that to the individuals speaking?
Thank you. I think I would always say to first just validate that, you know, what you're going through, it's not your fault, and it's okay. It is okay to be feeling this way because you're human, and God made you with emotions. And so, of course, you're going to feel things. And we live in a world of sin, so of course the emotions aren't always going to work in your favor. So that validation piece you sometimes might actually just be enough, but at least is a good place to start. Second, I would say is asking if there's anything that they think would be helpful for you to do. I think a lot of the time people already know what they need, but they're scared to ask. And so opening that door to say, how can I support you? What do you need? Is invaluable. Third thing, I would say stop, drop, and pray. Can I pray with you right now? Is there anything that like you want me to pray for you about later? And then finally, offering to find them resources, or offering to drive them to an appointment if they're scared to go to a therapist, things like that.
Okay, can I ask you a question?
Yes. Hi.
Recently, it was on the news media that $1,500,000 given to the black people of Ontario. And make me ask the question, is mental illness on the rise among us, or plateau, or declining? Just want to know.
That's a great question. And so, I mean, I don't have statistics to back this up, so I'll preface by saying that. But I would say it's on the rise for a few different reasons. One, we actually know to look for certain symptoms and diagnose it now. And so somebody might have been going through this several years ago, or I don't know, 50 years ago, and it would not have been diagnosed, whereas now it is, so that would increase the numbers. Secondly, I think we just, especially for young people, there's a lot of pressure coming from very different avenues. And what we tend to notice with mental illness is it's usually triggered by something. Somebody could have a mental illness kind of dormant in their brain a little bit, depending on the illness. For some illnesses, they've always been there, they show up, all those things. But for some illnesses, it takes a certain event that really unlocks everything, and that's when it starts to decline. And we have a lot more opportunities for those traumatic events to happen, or for that pressure that unlocks certain things in someone that causes their mental illness to flare up or causes their mental health to decline. So I would say it's probably on the rise for that.
Hi, I have a question. So we've been talking about mental health for a while, even within our conference.
Okay.
So last night, Men's Ministry at Ontario Conference was talking about emotional social justice, right? So in terms of emotions, because they mentioned that a lot of men don't show emotions, and that triggers in terms of mental health. So my question is, it's good, and we mentioned men or black men, to have emotions, but can we not be too emotional?
Well, can you define, what would you say too emotional is, if you have an
So
example?
when I think about emotions, a lot of men are taught not to cry as boys. So when they get older, even though it might be a time to cry, they, like myself, will hold back those tears. So in terms of too emotional, if you see a young man or a man, every time you see that person, they're showing their emotions in terms of crying and other things, could it be too excessive?
I think you would have to look at the root of it, because that person, if they're always sad and always crying, it's not necessarily, oh, you're just showing too much emotion. It could be like an actual diagnosable thing, like they're actually depressed or something like that, in which case that's just a symptom that is pointing to what kind of help they need. I personally don't really love the idea of somebody being too emotional. I think that we can definitely say there's times when it's inappropriate to do something. Like, you know, it's not appropriate to start yelling because you're angry in the middle of the grocery store, for example, right? Yeah. So there's instances where your emotions, one might caution you to save them for later or something. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, though, if I don't think that somebody could be crying too much. I think it would just be an indicator that they need more help, if that's helpful.
Yeah. Yes, mental health is a huge stigma in the black community. And in our even in our family spaces, it's not the ideal space to discuss any issues you may be faced with. So my question to you is, what are some other outlets that somebody could reach out to discuss issues that they're faced with?
Outside of the family.
Outside of the family.
Okay. I mean, for kids, there's guidance counselors or social workers at your school. There's peer support groups, which you can usually find through your local community centers. I actually have a slide here, if it's going to pop up. Maybe it won't, but there's different hotlines. Hotlines are a great tool. Actually, the Ontario Conference has a few resources, I believe, on their website in terms of subsidized therapy and counseling. And so I would say if you're a parent, for example, and you have a child who you could tell they're not opening up and you want to talk about something with them, but they're just not taking the bait, it's okay to send your child to a counselor. Sometimes you cannot be the one to talk to them about it with. But I would say as a church, also encouraging those types of conversations through small groups. Sabbath school groups are a great opportunity to have those conversations if it's not through a parent. Things like that. Also encouraging your child, because if we're talking about mental health in general and not just necessarily an illness that can be diagnosed, if you notice that your child is really struggling with something, getting them involved in things that they're just going to find enjoyable and fun and stress relieving. Do you want to pick up a new sport? Do you want to try going to a pottery class? Do you want to take a nap? There's so many different things that can really increase your child's mental health without you having to sit there and have that whole discussion at the kitchen table.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more question.
My other question is like, what is the, as a parent dealing with a with child with a mental illness, what is the most comfortable way as a parent besides therapy and prayer that a parent could do that with the child day to day?
I would suggest two things. One being journaling, and the second one being, as a parent, to go to a peer support group or to go to therapy yourself. Or counseling, but more I would say a peer support group where you can meet with other parents who also have children with mental health challenges or mental illnesses and just talk and share and be a part of that community. And by the way, that's a great thing to start at a church because I'm sure there's so many families here, for example, who have kids who do face challenges. But for the journaling with your child, if you have a child that is too young to write how they feel or to draw how they feel, great things that I do with little kids is I print out emojis, and if they're going through something or they're kind of upset, they can point to which emoji they feel. And then just kind of validate, hey, like you feel like the sad emoji right now? I'm sorry to hear that. That must be really hard. I know you can get through it. I'm here with you. Or you feel really happy right now? That's fantastic. I'm celebrating with you. You feel angry right now? Well, let's take a second and take a deep breath. Things like that. But like teaching your child how to identify their own emotions is invaluable because they grow up with that and they continue to realize how to do that and eventually get to the point where if they need help themselves, they know how to identify what they're feeling. Yes. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Absolutely. Feed off of it. Mm-hmm. 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 It's very angry. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Perpetuated from. Yes, absolutely. I thank you for bringing that up. And I think that's why, for example, mentioning the parents joining peer support groups or having those conversations with other parents in a safe space, parents modeling self-care, parents modeling saying no, parents modeling all these different things is really what indicates to children that it's okay to do that, and that is how we break the cycle. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciated being here with all of you. Oh, thank you. And I just have on this screen a few different resources that you can look up, just specifically with the Psychology Today one. If you Google Psychology Today Black Therapists, you can find different people like myself registered on there under Black Therapist, just so you know. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Shaina, for that wonderful and informative presentation. We appreciate you coming out to share with us because mental health is definitely a big-time stigma in our community. And like you said before, we are faced with many, many barriers. And we need to start to break down those barriers. And the way how we're going to do that is for us to have more conversation. And I'm looking forward to hearing you again. I didn't know you were such a polished young lady. And may God continue to bless you in your field of work and in the work that work that you're doing in the church. I understand that you're very active in the church. So may God continue to bless you and keep you and strengthen you as you continue to work for God. At this time, I will invite Pastor Sewell to come and say a final word, and then he will close out with a final prayer.
Thank you very much, Elder. On behalf of our church family, I would like to register a deep-seated appreciation for such a timely and insightful presentation. A subject of paramount universal importance, mental health. So at this time, I want to invite you to stand, and I would like to give this small token of our appreciation. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Can I give you a hug?
Please do.
Thank you.
Okay, shall we stand? Let us pray. Father God, we thank you for the information, timely message you have sent to us. We know that you wish above all things that we prosper and be in good health, just as our souls prosper. We pray that we will embrace this presentation, because the truth is we're all struggling. And I pray that we will now implement, put into practice these suggestions so that we will be able to perform at peak performance. We ask that you'll bless the presenter, Sister Charles, and I pray that you bless us as a people as we make this segue into the next program. May your spirit rest, remain, and abide with us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much. You may be seated.
And everyone, we're not done yet. We have culture night, so you're all invited to make your way over the gym to involve yourself in all the festivities over there. And maybe you can even pick up a little something to eat along the way. God bless.